Shabbat Shalom. In his book called Belonging, author Jeffrey Cohen tells a story about a girl named Paige. Paige was one of a handful of Jewish students in her 9th grade class. And she was especially excited because she'd just been admitted to a competitive magnet school in her district. And so going to a new school, she was of course nervous, but prepared, proud of her achievements to get in, until two of her male classmates carried out an anti-Semitic stunt. They had put the words, "I hate Jews," on the beach, taken a picture and texted it to a group of students, of which she was included. She wasn't the only Jewish student at the school, but she certainly saw it. And she realized as she talked with others that there had been other acts of anti-Semitism at the school. There had been swastikas written on notebooks, and at one point a group of kids chose to read Hitler's Mein Kampf in the cafeteria. And so, of course, telling her parents and reporting it, the principal disciplined the boys. But surprising, or maybe not surprising, Paige was also punished. Not by the principal, but by her peers. She was called a snitch and quickly became isolated because, of course, it's not cool to be the one who calls out people saying things that aren't appropriate to say. And, of course, this made her parents even more upset. So disappointed in the school's response, they decided to sue the school, which eventually led to the state attorney general's office opening up an investigation, which eventually led to newspapers covering the story, which eventually led to the two boys who posted the picture having their college offers rescinded. Paige, unable to reclaim any sense of a normal experience, transferred to a different school. Cohen's writing and sharing this story begs the question, did anybody win in that scenario? In 1997, two cultural anthropologists, Richard Schweider and Lene Jensen, developed what they called the three ethics approach to problems. As you might guess, it divides ethical decisions into not one or two, but three approaches. The first is the ethics of autonomy. When we focus on the ethic of autonomy, we focus on the needs of the individual, making sure that there's equity among people, that what I experience is what you experience, that I'm not treated differently than you are, and that you're not treated any differently than me. It's an ethic that's deep in sympathy and even empathy, that we look at each individual's experience and we feel for them. According to their study, they also studied who tends to follow these particular lenses. This lens, in their study that studied Americans and people living in India, found that those who are liberally minded people tend to be the ones most often drawn to an ethic of autonomy. This was Paige's parents. She was being treated unfairly. They were concerned for the well-being of an individual, particularly one so close to them. Another lens is the ethic of divinity. It's not so much about religion, but religion is an example of how you might fall into this category. This is a concern for moral purity, particularly for the individual to abide by divine or natural law. According to this study, this is the lens that, generally speaking, conservatively minded people prefer. This is how the principal reacted, showing concern for the rules of the institution, punishing the boys by giving them a natural consequence for their actions. We've created standards, you broke the standards, and therefore there's a consequence for what you did. The system worked. Perhaps the principal felt that he applied the rules as they were set, and therefore there was nothing else he could do. These are the same type of it's the same ethic that's used when we say we have to do something because that's what God said, some might say, but we might even say because it's the right thing to do. You take care of the earth because it's the right thing to do. Some would say because God said take care of the earth. Some would say it's the right thing to do. It's all the same idea. There are some rules that we just have to follow if we want society to work. But for Paige's parents, of course, the principle following the rules wasn't enough. So now we get to the third ethic, the ethic of community. It's concerned with the welfare of the group, particularly how individuals are responsible to each other and the greater needs of the community. And so here I want to make a leap. You can tell me it's a leap too far, but it's a leap nonetheless, to our Torah portion, which Lorelei knows all about. She could come up and say this part, but she's going to do that tomorrow. Our Torah portion is about Shemitah and Yovel, or sometimes called Jubilee. It's the idea that every 7 years you are supposed to stop working your land, and you are to release any debts that you have. And after the 49th year and the 50th year, the Jubilee year they called it, you would, because it was the multiple of 7, it would also be a release of land and of debts, and you would also, anybody who was a slave would also be given the opportunity to go free, and any property that you had purchased would go back to the original owner. Essentially, in my mind, we become this hyper-socialist state, right? That everything all of a sudden loses its title. And the board is cleared. But the question, of course, is why? A better question, or maybe a different topic is, did it work? And the answer is no, it never worked. They could never figure out exactly how to make this work because the economy would just collapse. Nonetheless, there was this idea that this is how the world should work. Every 7th year should be a totally different year. You should stop what you're doing. Just let the land grow as it is. Just let the debts be forgiven. Let everybody get back to a starting place. So, the question of why. The Torah says this is because we have to respect God's creations, both human beings and the earth. We have to make sure that what God created gets to thrive. If you read the verses in the Torah, that's what it tells us is the reasoning. This is the ethic of divinity. God said that this is important, therefore we should do it. There's a higher power. We shouldn't question it. It's not up to us to decide. The ethic of divinity, by the way, is one that's called one of the ethics that has the most humility in it. In other words, I'm not in charge. This isn't my land. I'm just renting it from a higher power. I should take care of it. The rabbis who write later, in their good liberal voices, promote the ethic of autonomy. They say, no, this is about the poor person. This is about the person who's living in society and can't quite get up to par. So society has to adjust to save the individual so that everybody gets to be on par again. And then there was Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi of Israel. He said differently. The purpose of the Jubilee was not economic at all. It was spiritual. It came to restore the sense of unity that once prevailed in Israel and to restore self-respect to the person who had sunk into poverty and a sense of failure. The thing about the ethic of community that they found in their study, both liberals and conservatives like it a lot. Everyone agrees on the ethic of community. Rav Kook says, our story this week, the reason we stop the world is because we have to remember, in the broadest sense, we are all a part of the same people. This is all our space. It's also about helping the poor, and it's also about preserving the land. It's about all of it in one. The purpose of the Jubilee is to unify the group and restore self-respect at one time. So what would it have looked like if that had been the focus of Paige's principle, or of her parents? What would it look like if the school took a break from its regular routine and focused on the value of being a single community, or refocusing the idea of belonging to the broadest sense of the term? What if it wasn't an us versus them mentality, the boys versus Paige, or Paige's parents versus the school, but rather a we have to fix this mentality? What would need to stop and pause in order for that fixing to take priority? One more story about teenagers. Some of you may have seen, if you follow my wife on Facebook, which I highly recommend, that she bragged about our daughter this week. So I don't brag about our children on Facebook, I do it from the Bema. So our daughter, on Tuesday, I think it was, the school told us that they'd be dropping off a sign to put in the yard because our daughter had applied for this program called the Web Leader Program, and she had been chosen to be a web leader. I've seen these signs around town. I don't know if you've seen them too. But I've seen other kids in the neighborhood. They get the sign in the yard that says, my child is a web leader. It's sort of like the bumper sticker that goes on the back of the car. And so I did what I was told. I put a sign in the yard before Hannah got off the bus. She got off the bus, and I was told I had to be ready to take a picture so that I can send it to the teacher so the teacher can put it on the page for the school. And Hannah was excited because she was one of the people who got chosen. And all I really knew about it was this means that next year when she's in 8th grade, the oldest of the middle school kids, that she will be a mentor for the youngest of the kids, and that possibly that means she'll get to mentor her younger brother Noah because he'll be going into his first year of middle school. And to be honest, as I saw these signs everywhere, I thought web leader meant one of two things. Either it was some sort of a reference to a spider web in the way that the kids are connected, or it meant that they were going to do some intense online, like, connecting with other people. So I asked Hannah, well, what does it stand for? Anybody know? Where Everyone Belongs. It's a national program. It's led by the Boomerang Project. It's in middle schools all over the country. And it asks the oldest kids to train over the summer, to be there for the youngest kids when they start school the way Paige started school. And because it's run by a smart national organization, and that organization has somebody in their marketing department, they crunch numbers. There are schools all over the country running this program. Some of the schools report a 93% decrease in suspensions once they started. A 54% reduction in students with D's or F's. That was a school in Ohio. A school that had 12 reported bullying incidents one year had 2 consecutive years of 0 incidents reported after they started. And a school reported 46% reduction in absences. So some of us are drawn to believe that good in the world comes from a set of rules, what some would call ethics, that if we follow the rules, things will go well. Some of us tend to see good in the world by looking at an individual and saying, well, look what happened to that person. We can't let that happen again, so we have to right that problem. But according to their study, the one area we all agree on is the ethic of the community, the ethic that asks us to look at the well-being of the entirety of the group in the broadest sense. In writing this sermon, there were 22, 23, 45, I don't know, other sermons that could have come off of it, because I can think of how this applies to so many of the scenarios that we're working on today. Right now in the Ohio State House, they're debating this bill to keep DEI on college campuses, the diversity, equity, inclusion, or to get rid of them. We're trying to figure out whether abortion rights are about the individual, or whether they're what God said should happen, or whether they're about the community. The way we talk about issues so often is dependent on what type of ethical glasses we put on, and yet it seems, if their study is correct, there is a set of lenses that we all wear, and that perhaps we can put on and figure out how to solve some of these problems together. We don't need to live in an us versus them world, but perhaps at times we need a break from all of our work and all of our busyness and all of our ways of doing things that we think are the right way, We need a Shabbat to force us to look beyond the rules and beyond the individual. A Shabbat to look at the community, to see if we can figure out precisely where we all belong. Shabbat Shalom.